Yuji and Sukuna's dynamic throughout all of JJK is honestly one of the best parts about Jujutsu Kaisen. The way that Sukuna honestly just hates Yuji for absolutely no reason and actively just has to think to himself anytime he even thinks about giving Yuji a compliment is honestly hilarious. My main thought about this is we've seen so many different animes where we've had that trope of there's a demon inside of your body and you have to either learn to control it or something along the lines like anything from Naruto to Black Clover to so many different things. It's always something that you could see and you've gotten so used to. JJK does it so differently, and that's honestly why I love it so much. So I was really wondering, what would have happened if Sukuna and Yuji could actively work together like we've seen in so many different animes where they get along and they can actually learn to coexist. They don't and aren't fighting each other. They aren't completely just trying to wreck each other. Sukuna's not trying to kill everybody. Or if he is, Yuji and him can at least work on some complete arrangement where it's not a complete binding vow, but it's something that they could at least both come to and say, yeah, we're okay with this, we're good. We have a complete mutual understanding and everything else like that. Obviously, Sukuna is easily one of the strongest characters in JJK. We already know this. We've seen what he's been doing in the manga, and we've just seen everything that's going on. Yuji, we already know, has insane potential, and we already know that he has insane capabilities that he's able to pull off that we've been seeing and we've just been able to understand. If he was able to actively work with Sukuna, they would be the biggest threats in the entirety of JJK for the simple reason of Sukuna could probably actively teach Yuji to understand a lot more things extremely quickly, and they could actively just basically be training with each other inside of their own mind space anytime that they wanted to in that kind of sense. Because Yuji has been able to enter the mind space obviously when he was like basically on the brink of death, but I don't really understand and don't see why it wouldn't be possible for him to enter it at any other point in time. And even if he can't, this is a what if scenario, so we'll just say that that can happen simply due to the fact that I want that to happen in this scenario. But let me at least get into talking about where I think this can go and happen. We already know Sukuna is insanely strong. I've already said this and everybody knows this. Sukuna has so many insane hacks and abilities, and we already know that so many people are always just going off and saying that, oh yeah, Sukuna is just able to pull off so many random moves from nowhere and has all of these random just ass pulls that he just gets from Gege and is able to just do so many random things that he shouldn't be able to do. Sukuna is the king of curses. That's a given fact, obviously. He's able to do so many insane levels of things, and if him and Yuji were able to work together, that would mean one, Sukuna would never try leaving Yuji's body. If they can actively come to at least a good agreement and they were able to actively just come together as one, that would be the best thing for them, strictly due to the fact of one, that means there's not going to be any real problems, especially if we have that automatically start as soon as Yuji gets the finger. If we have it start at that exact moment, like if we do like a little sense of as soon as Yuji eats the finger, they go straight into his mindscape, and it's like a little switch that flips where inside the mindscape it could be a little bit of a time, because it could, I honestly, this is just how my brain is imagining it. Even if it wouldn't work like this in real life, just get listen to my vision of where my mind is going with this. So we could easily just have it be where they end up in the mind space, or even if we don't even have it end up there, it could either, my first idea, they end up in the mind space and it like no time passes in the real world, but time passes in the actual mindscape, and they're just basically talking and figuring out exactly all the rules. They get along fairly decently well, and at least Sukuna gets along with Yuji and Yuji gets along with Sukuna, and they automatically get along. Gojo comes around, Yuji's able to completely control Sukuna, and this time there's not really any big problems going on right there. Or the other situation or scenario is while Yuji's asleep and before he actively gets introduced to Gojo inside of that little place, while he's asleep, he's actually in the mind space around that time, and he has ample time with Sukuna to actually get to know Sukuna and actively create like a working relationship with him. That one's the more obviously likely to happen, And with all of that time that would have passed, whatever, like 2-3 days that Yuji would probably be knocked out or whatever, Yuji would be able to talk to Sukuna and come to at least accord. And especially if Yuji has anything else happen before or prior meeting Sukuna and Megami, that could easily change his personality in a sense. Where my main thing is, where when his grandfather dies, he's not right around Yuji, so he never says the words, make sure you have a meaningful death. So that's the one thing I kind of need to take out in the scenario to even get Yuji and Sukuna to be able to work together in any kind of way. And so Yuji meets Sukuna, they have their conversation, and I would honestly see it having it more of like a Kurama moment where they're talking, Yuji and Sukuna find some kind of accord, and Yuji's not like any kind of normal person, everything else like that, you know, yada yada yada, the extreme amount of BS and copious amount of things. So they get along. That's the base thing that you have to understand. If they get along, the story changes so quickly due to the fact that one, Sukuna's not going to be messing up anything. If he and Yuji get along, and I'm not going to say like they create a binding vow where Sukuna is able to get access to Yuji whenever he wants, or like get access to be able to switch whatever he wants. But if we have like a situation where it's like Yuji will use Sukuna and there's not going to be like any kind of extra BS going around where it's like, oh yeah, Sukuna's gonna, as soon as Sukuna even gets out, he's gonna automatically try killing people and everything else like that, we could at least get that specifically done. That might be the only binding vow that they would even have, where Yuji and Sukuna completely agree that no killing of innocents. Like, they can kill whoever like needs to be killed. So if like Mahito needs to go early, Mahito can go early. If somebody needs to die early, there's no problem with that. But there's no like, oh yeah, let's kill all of Shibuya just because we want to, or let's kill all of these innocent people just because we want to. None of that happens. So that might be the only thing that even remotely would stand a chance of even being plausible. But in all fairness, after we would even see like any of that happening, it would really just go along the lines of Yuji waking up, Yuji seeing Gojo, and Yuji already kind of understanding what's about to going on, since he had a couple times with Sukuna to even understand his scenario and his situation. Sukuna probably would have explained to him everything that he needed to know that he was going to be told anyways. So he would be told by Gojo, yeah, you ate a finger Sukuna, there are 20 of them. Yuji would say, okay, yeah, yada, 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 yada. He already knows all of this and things like that. And eventually would get to the point where Gojo says, instead of killing you right now, we're going to wait until you eat all 20 of Sukuna's fingers and then kill you then. So it's like, that way we can at least get him completely gone and everything else like that, which Yuji obviously doesn't like. But he has a lot of time before he even has to be thinking of that, so he's fine with that. As eventually we would get to the point where they're walking over to like Jujutsu High, and Yuji's like dealing with the thing about having to actually be asked in to join Jujutsu High and everything else along those lines. Obviously this time Sukuna's not going to be like doing any extra talking or anything else like that. Even if he does, it would mainly be just yapping over to Gojo and things like that, where Gojo would be surprised and like see that, oh yeah, Sukuna is able to talk whenever, and like Yuji actually finds that cool. That way they can actually just communicate whenever they need to, which honestly is probably better for them anyways. So once Yuji actually gets inside with like Principal Yaga, or like Yagi or whatever, I can never remember what his name is, and I'm not gonna bother. But once he gets inside with the principal, it would be a little different of a scenario, because once Yuji has a little more strength due to the fact that Sukuna's allowing him at least access to any of the like a small amount of abilities if he needs to, because I honestly see that actively being able to work. If they can at least want to work together, I don't see a reason why Yuji can't at least access some of Sukuna's strength, speed, and abilities automatically, and Sukuna could probably actually understand and teach Yuji a few things fairly quickly. So I really see that Yuji would probably do a lot better in that little skirmish. And I would even like, when Yuji gets asked like what's the meaning of everything else like that, Yuji probably would still have a decent answer, because it's still Yuji. It wouldn't be like, oh yeah, die a meaningful death, or wouldn't be anything else like the same exact answer, but it would be a still meaningful answer that he could at least give to say whatever he needs to be sated. But once all of that happens, obviously we get to Yuji seeing Megami, getting introduced to Nobara, and this time around obviously it goes a little different because Yuji can use Sukuna at will without having any problems with any kind of possible backlash. And that alone is extremely good for him, strictly due to the fact that he doesn't have to worry about something along the lines of, oh, if I use Sukuna, he's going to kill all of these people for no reason or anything else like that. So we would have the Nobara arc and like him meeting Nobara and everybody meeting Nobara, they going into the building and Yuji still doing all the things and crazy stuff that he's able to do. Obviously, Sukuna doesn't really need to be used at this exact moment, but obviously once we get over to the little prison incident or whatever where the special grade is located, we would have a little difference of events. Obviously this time around, once they see the special grade, Yuji would probably still tell Megami and Nobara to go away and get to safety or whatever, but this time when he switches to Sukuna, he has no worry. Sukuna deals with the special grade most likely in the exact same way. And then as soon as that's done, they switch right back and nothing even goes any big problems. He would eat the finger and just completely keep it pushing. That's literally all that happens in that event. So nobody dies, nobody even really gets injured and everything else like that. They're able to get out and escape without any real big problems. And with that, obviously that means there's no dead Yuji events that would normally go along, besides the fact that I could honestly just see Gojo having Yuji go train with Nanami and everything else along those lines. So with that specific event, I really just see Yuji having a lot of extra time to go train with Sukuna, because I would probably see Gojo still having Yuji separated from everybody else strictly due to the fact that Yuji needs to learn a few things and catch up to everyone else and what they're able to do. And with that, within the whatever amount of time that Yuji has between that event and when the Goodwill event would take place, I see Yuji still ending up going with Nanami. There's a possibility of that happening, and if that happens, Yuji still meets Junpei, and he still ends up having all those events go on in that same similar way. And the biggest difference in all of these events is when Yuji has to deal with Mahito for that first time after like dealing and seeing what he does to Junpei. Sukuna's not gonna be over here just laughing at Yuji and just going off and saying, oh yeah, like I'm not gonna help you, I'd probably just kill the closest person next to me. As soon as Yuji says he needs Sukuna's help, Sukuna would gladly give his help. He would help Yuji and do exactly whatever needs to be done. Obviously, Mahito has a horrible pairing when it comes to even dealing with either Yuji or Sukuna due to the fact of how they operate. And I'm not going to say that this is probably like a 3-finger Sukuna, maybe 4-finger, I can't remember exactly, that he can easily beat Mahito, but there would be a very big problem going around here, strictly due to the fact that Sukuna is obviously so strong and he's able to do so much, and especially if he puts in like his domain expansion, Mahito's gonna be having a very, very hard time. There is honestly, I see a small % chance that Mahito survives and makes it a runaway, but there's a good possibility that he ends up just dying right there. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong and say that Sukuna at this moment wouldn't be able to deal with Mahito. And if he can't, okay, that's not my bad, but that's just basically where I see this going. And even then, by this point, I would honestly see Yuji having something along the lines of like a reverse curse technique, and having something along the lines of divergent fist, and being able to at least access cleave and dismantle to a decent extent. So him and they're already just kind of being perfectly well suited together. And Sukuna actually enjoys having Yuji's body because it's already extremely strong, agile, and already has these big perks due to the fact of who Yuji is. So it works out perfectly for him. And with Mahito basically dealt with, and for the most part, there's not really much that goes along there. Yuji just a little more training, but eventually meets back up with everybody for the Goodwill event. And as for any of this happening, Obviously, Mahito most likely wouldn't be there due to the fact of, one, Sukuna was there and actively helped out, so that would be a very big difference. And when it comes to dealing with anything along the lines of the Kyoto students even trying to kill Yuji, Yuji would probably still deal with Todo alone, and that's not going to be a big problem because, one, it ends up in the same exact way with my best friendo and everything else like that, and those two becoming the close-knit brothers that we already know and have come to love. But then we would also see the events going off and around something along the lines of Yuji dealing with any of the actual cursed spirits. If he finds it too hard for him and Sukuna switch. Sukuna deals with it, especially once we get to what is the name, Hanami or whatever, the special grade curse that would probably still show up because, yeah, Mahito isn't there, but he wasn't completely the most important part of this plan. I would still see some of this actively happening, and Kenjaku probably wouldn't have had enough time to just completely cancel the plan. So I see that going on, and with this, Sukuna would take control simply because this isn't something Yuji's ready to face at that exact moment. But the big difference is Sukuna's not going to be trying to hurt anybody else, so he's not going to be out here just wiling out and things like that. So those two are actually basically working in perfect sync and are able to basically just switch in and out because Yuji's able to actively pull in some good decent punches too. So him and Sukuna are just basically switching out perfectly, and almost every time that Yuji switches, he's using Divergent Fist or maybe even hitting a singular Black Flash, which I would honestly probably see him being able to hit maybe 2 if he's lucky enough. But it's obviously whatever happens. It could happen, could not happen, whatever. But with that, I honestly see them probably being able to maybe get 1 or 2 cursed wounds out. Most likely not 3 because Mahito isn't there. So there's a possibility they get some out, but not the same amount. And even if they only get 1, I would probably just have it be Chozo and everything else like that. But either way, most of the events that would end up happening right afterwards, like Megami having to go over to deal with his sister or finding the cursed spirits and things like the cursed wounds and things like that, and dealing with all of those probably wouldn't end up happening because they wouldn't have been able to grab all of them automatically the same way. They probably would still end up finding and grabbing another one of Sukuna's fingers and everything else like that. And then we would probably just have to deal with a good little portion of things that are a little miscellaneous, honestly. And then even when we get to anything along the lines of season 2, most of those events, 1, do not happen. Sukuna's not going to be wiling out, and Mahito's already gone, so there's no possible way to get the culling games and things like that. So a good portion of the events that would happen, Nanami obviously doesn't die, Nobara's fine. A good portion of everybody else that would have even had any problems are perfectly fine because Sukuna's not going to be out here just putting out his domain expansion, doing anything along the lines that he actively did in season 2. And all of the things that really happened in season 2 don't end up happening. All of that's fine. There's no big problems there because Sukuna's able to deal with all of that. The only, obviously, variable would be Kenjaku, which would be doing whatever he needs to be doing, but most of his plans are kind of ruined since Mahito's not around, and so he can't really completely do exactly what he needed to do. And so that kind of gets thrown out the way, and Sukuna's working with Yuji actively, so that screws up his plans. So would Gojo still manage to get sealed? Maybe. Is there a good possibility that Yuta's still sent out to go and try kill Yuji? Maybe. But all of those events are extreme variables that could probably end up happening. It could possibly not end up happening. It's just one of those things that you can't really be guaranteed to know which one happens in which area, which one happens there, which one happens now. Yes, we could say that Gojo still gets sealed and Yuta still gets assigned to kill Yuji. And especially if that ends up happening, which if Gojo gets sealed somehow, Yuji obviously still has to deal with Yuta, but Yuta is not going to be obviously trying to kill him completely and everything else like that. Yuta would just end up being hiding and whatever. So most of that's perfectly fine on that end, and we don't really have to worry about a good portion, but most of the rest of the story wouldn't end up happening because they're working perfectly together. They would probably just grab all of the fingers that they can, and eventually once we get to the point that, oh yeah, they're going to try killing Yuji wouldn't let that happen because at that point he would be a little too strong for anybody else to handle. And I'm including Gojo into that category too. If we have a completely like a good Yuji and Sukuna combination, and I honestly don't see one. If Sukuna's not going to be trying to kill anybody actively, Gojo's not going to be trying to kill Yuji. So there is a 0% possibility that Yuta or Gojo try killing Yuji because they've already understood his personality and already know that Sukuna works perfectly with him. So the higher ups are basically screwed out of that because there's nobody that can touch him that isn't Gojo or Yuta. So everybody else is shit out of luck because nobody's going to be able to do anything, and Yuji's just able to live however he pleases and everything else along those lines. But please tell me what you guys would think happens if Yuji and Sukuna were able to work together perfectly. This is just basically my speeding through version of all the events without having to go into every specific detail about all of the abilities that he would gain and everything else that he would be able to do. The sheer amount of debauchery and hilariousness that would probably ensue from specific characters figuring out that he's able to actually control him and work perfectly with him and in tandem and everything else like that. But please give me your opinions and thoughts about what would have happened and everything else that could have been possible in this scenario. But I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.